Hey there guys, AlphaKoala here. Just gonna run through the EWB challenge and some basic tips to kind of help everyone get a good start at it and hopefully explain a little bit of the confusing concepts. Okay, now the EWB challenge is really good in the sense that it teaches students a lot of things they wouldn't have learned elsewhere. Like, it's very different from a lot of other work they may have done. But the problem with that is, because it's so different, people kind of get a little bit confused and don't really know where to, begin with the project and end up wasting a lot of time doing things that may have been unnecessary. So I'm just gonna try and clear up a few of those things and hopefully get everyone on the right track. Okay, the first thing you should do is construct a team charter. And the importance of that is, basically that allows you to assess each team member's strengths and weaknesses. So you know who to assign to what task and who will feel comfortable with what. And you're kind of getting a feeling on how to interact with each other. Other things might include, how you're going to communicate with each other. You might decide to use a social network or something like that, or have a meeting. If you're going to have meetings, you're going to obviously have to look at meeting times, what's suitable for everyone, how often they want to have meetings, stuff like that. Some other things, rules of quality, kind of get a consensus of what grade you're aiming for, stuff like that. So basically, if you want to, sort of like a template for that, you can look at the bottom of my webpage. If you are on my website, you'll find, all of these notes and all the templates and files I reference down the bottom of the page. If you're currently, watching this video on another site, you might want to kind of jump over to my website. Okay, the next thing you want to do is create a minutes page and minutes agenda. Now, we'll look at those individually. A minutes page it's good for a number of reasons. Firstly, it helps team members to identify sort of what's being reached during the meeting in a kind of more specific manner, because sometimes meetings get a bit loose. And it also kind of helps people clearly see what task they have actually been assigned. Because, sometimes people forget or don't fully understand, but they don't speak up in the meeting, and that kind of can be detrimental. So having the task clearly defined really helps, and I would really recommend doing proper meeting notes. And there's a template for them, obviously, at the bottom of my page. Another thing for the minutes page is, if someone's missed your meeting, they can kind of just log online, or, however you decide to share these files, and then you can see everything that happened in the meeting in kind of compressed form, and see what work they've been assigned, and it's really, really useful. The next thing, the other thing it can be used for, if one team member's been assigned work and they haven't completed it, and then the next week happens and they've been assigned work and they haven't completed it, and the next week happens and they've been assigned work and haven't completed it, it's really obvious in the minutes, because it shows they've been assigned work and haven't completed it, multiple times. So you if you're getting a peer assessment you have to do, which can that's really, really good at justifying why you might want to mark someone down, mark other people up, or look at that. Okay, now as for the meeting agenda, the meeting agenda is good because if you don't have a plan for the meeting, you often waste a lot of time just sitting around not knowing what to do. Having a meeting agenda allows everyone to look at it in advance, get a feel or have an understanding of what's going to happen in the meeting, maybe think about it a little bit, how they can improve it. They get in there, they know what has to be done, they have a step-by-step series of things they have to discuss, and you can really save a lot of time just by having a meeting agenda. I just went to a meeting today with no agenda, and we just sat around and ended up playing Flash games, so that was bad. Okay, read the client's brief. Now, often there'll be multiple client briefs for the EWB challenge. Often the EWB website will often give you maybe 1 or 2 client briefs, maybe one for the challenge in general, one for your area in general. Often your institution will give you a client brief. So, you gotta find them. There's normally only 2, but there might be 3. You gotta find them, read them, and really fully understand what's happening. Because if you go into the project and you don't know what it's about, you're gonna waste a lot of time. And it's really important you get these steps done at the start to save time for the rest of your assignment. Okay, the next thing to do is assign work. So you've had your team meeting, you've made a team charter, minutes, meeting agenda, and you've read the client brief together and discussed it as a group and done all the groupy things. The next thing you gotta do is assign work. Now, you want to assign work early on so you get a good, strong start to the project. It's not a particularly hard project, but if you get a good, strong start to it, you can normally get it out of the way before your exams and stuff like that. And I find that's really helpful. Alright, the next thing is explore the EWB website. And out of all of the teams I've seen do this, probably 6 I've spoken to, only maybe 2 said they actually explored the EWB website, but they think they should have explored it, more toward the start of the thing. And the EWB website has a lot of information regarding, the area, their culture, society, all the topics. If you follow the links and look at the sublinks, and those sublinks will link to other links, and it's not a very well-designed website, to be honest. There's a lot of information tucked away in corners that you won't find unless you look for it. So you actually have to look for it all and sift through that, maybe as a group, maybe by yourself. It's really up to you. Sift through it. You might not want to read too specifically into some of the sublinks, because, there's no point reading too much into ICT if you're going to be doing sanitation, but you should at least read the general pages so you get a feel. So when it comes to selecting a subject, you're better equipped. Okay, now, the next thing you want to do is download a template. If you've explored the EWB website, you should have already found their template. If not, you might want to poke around the EWB website a bit more, because you probably haven't done enough. Now, the EWB template is really useful. It outlines step-by-step process. It gives you a feel. Like, if you want to make a project timeline, it's really going to help you get a step-by-step process on how to complete the EWB challenge, as long as an example on how they want to, set out what needs to be included, stuff like that. It is really good. The next thing you want to do is seek advice. Find someone who's done the challenge before and get their tips on it. This might take 10 minutes. You might be a lecturer or tutor, but you really want some advice on the EWB challenge. Often they might find, they might give you some really good resources, like, example assignments, stuff like that. They might give you links to, places you can look for information that you wouldn't find by yourself. The next step is to actually get an example. If you can get an example assignment from a previous year, often you can find these straight offline, like they're not really hidden, they're just kind of there. Often you want to try to find a good one rather than a bad one. These can be really helpful because it kind of shows you an example of each paragraph or each topic that needs to be written that's in your assignment. It's important when you choose an example assignment, though, that you don't choose one that's irrelevant to you. Like, some chemistry students are only allowed to use, like, chemicals, and they have to use, like, lots of chemical equations, whereas you might not have the slightest clue on how chemicals work. So that's probably a bad choice for you. So try and find an appropriate example that should match kind of the grade you're all aiming for. Okay, the next thing you're going to want to do is set up the appropriate communication method. So, if you agree that you're going to be using a social network or a cloud device, something like that, you want to settle that up nice and quickly so you can start sharing information right away. Okay, the next thing to do is create a project timeline. Whew. Alright, so you've got probably an example assignment, probably the template. You should be able to break them into a list of things that have to be done and make a reasonable estimate on how much time they're each going to take. Now, you might want to kind of, like, it's going to be fairly loose. Like, things might change and you have to be okay with that. But the important thing is to make a list of step-by-step instructions that you know have to be completed by the end of must be completed to complete the assignment. And you got to monitor your progress using it. Alright, the next thing you should do is brainstorm. So you've read the EWB website, mostly kind of vaguely. The next thing you should do is brainstorm. See who feels well equipped to do what. Like, if everyone's kind of agreeing that ICT may not be a great field, then you might want to look into sanitation, or you might want to look at water purification, something like that. Normally, just by brainstorming at the start, you kind of get a feel for, what's going to be suitable and what's not going to be suitable. And if it's going to be suitable to do, one of the subjects more than all the others, you might want to start exploring into that subject more than the others. I mean, you can always change your mind a bit later if you want to, but I find it's best to kind of get a direction and go for it, because there's no real wrong subject. All the subjects are perfectly viable. Alright, the next thing you're going to want to do is read information. So you've kind of picked your most likely subject. You want to read more specific information on that. And the more information you read on that, the more information you're going to accidentally stumble across for other ones. And, that's okay. Because that kind of, it gives you a little bit of an understanding of the other topics, and gives you a better understanding of your topic. Alright, the next thing you're going to want to do is generate alternative solutions. So you've defined your problem, you've defined what's acceptable socially, because you kind of read the EWB website, what they're looking for environmentally, stuff like that. So you're going to generate a whole list of alternative solutions. I found it's best to get each member to maybe make about 5. And if they're all kind of different along different tangents, you're going to have like 30 different solutions. And you just kind of bring them all in as a group, discuss them, kind of look at, hey, this is a great idea, could I, mix this with this idea over here, and kind of put this idea in here, no, this one won't work because this is rubbish. And basically by doing that, you can kind of narrow it down to maybe 2 or 3 really good ideas that might have combined aspects from other ideas, and, with team discussion, kind of improve them at a base level. Okay, so that brings us to a next step, which is narrow your range. You don't want to be exploring 30 ideas in depth, because that is going to take you ages. You kind of want to pick 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, and kind of look into them more in depth and kind of say, well, even though this one looked like a great idea, it actually isn't viable because, they don't have spaceships, so they can't use them to travel between villages. That's not practical. We probably should have seen that earlier, but we didn't. So, just by doing some basic research, you might disprove 2 or 3, and then you gotta get a feel for which idea is going to be your best idea. Hey there guys, AlphaKoala back. Sorry about that, the battery cut out, but let's just jump straight back into it. Alright, so your next step will be optimizing the design. And that's basically, you've picked your design, so now you need to look at all its components and see maybe there is in fact room for improvement in your design. Okay, so basically you want to look at each one of the components of your design, and you can look at your design as a system. So, say you have like water purification, you might have, collection area, filter, output, which is a simple one. You want to look at each individual component and see, maybe it can be done differently. Maybe you could have like a biosand filter or a nanomesh filter or, different types of filters. And you want to kind of look at each one you could use, kind of evaluate against them each other and say, well, we could have done it this way, but we chose to do it this way because it just seemed better. And that kind of shows that you've considered, the constraints and the society's needs and stuff like that, and kind of really actually thought about your design other than saying, let's filter water. Yeah! You've kind of said, let's filter water, but let's make sure we're doing it well. Okay, now the next thing you should do is check your criteria. And so you've come up with your idea. You need to make sure it meets all your constraints that are given to you by, your institution or the EWB challenge. Sometimes criteria are like, you may have to use chemicals or something like that if you're a chemistry student, but normally the criteria will be basically just sustainability. So it'll be basically, is it economically viable, is it environmentally friendly, and is it, what's the last one? Is it socially acceptable? Yep, that's it. Alright, so, if it fits all those 3 categories, you probably got a pretty good device in your hands, and it might actually be, good. The next thing you want to do is select a liaison, and basically that means you want to put aside 1, maybe 2 of your members, and just say, hey, we're doing work, can you compile it into a pretty report? So at the end, we've kind of got a pretty report, and we don't have to kind of do a last-minute rush to put everything together. And that's kind of effective, because it basically stops you from getting lumped up with a big sum of work at the end, and kind of lets you monitor how well you're doing. Alright, so the people who aren't, kind of integrating all your information, should be working on analyzing each individual component. So, you know, you selected maybe biosand. So maybe I'll look into biosand, look how much water it can take, look how it functions, look at, you know, some bad things about it, some good things about it. Maybe kind of say, well, you know, maybe biosand actually wasn't that great. Or maybe, hey, it's even better than we thought. We can probably reduce this aspect to make this, you know, work to its capacity. So basically you want to look at, you know, all your individual components and get, like, information on them. Maybe draw some pretty diagrams and put them in. Because, you know, you kind of want pretty things in your assignment. That's why, you know, that template, which should be down the bottom. Oh, that template's nice and pretty. Okay, so yeah, basically now you've got a design with a lot of good components. You've got your work integrated. The last steps, you know, just going to be like filling out some, you know, other kind of stuff depending on your institution. Maybe analyzing, say, put an introduction, put like team reflection, stuff like that. And you can kind of do all that yourself. It's pretty intuitive. So hopefully everyone's gained a strong understanding of what to do and, you know, refers to the information below the video. Assuming you're on my website, which you should be.